Kia ora, good morning everyone, Viltrox here. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to have a look at another full frame lens from Viltrox for the Nikon Z mirrorless cameras. This is the Viltrox AF 50mm f1.8Z. If you come here looking for the review of the Sony version of this Viltrox 50mm lens, I have already done and published a review of the Sony version of this lens, so check out the link in the video description below, or I will put a link up here. And before we start, just the usual disclaimer. The lens sample that I used in this review was provided by Viltrox free of charge. But as usual, this is an independent review, so I will talk about all the pros and cons I found about this lens. However, if you decide that you want to purchase this lens after watching this review, I would really appreciate if you use one of my affiliated links in the video description below so that I can earn a small amount of money to help me pay for some of the expenses of this channel. This Viltrox AF 50mm f1.8Z lens has a very similar design to the other full-frame Viltrox AF lenses. It has autofocus, electronic contacts on the lens mount. Basically, this lens behaves just like a native Z autofocus lens from Nikon. The body of the lens is mostly made of metal, including the metal lens mount. There is a big metal focus ring at the front of the lens, and then there is a decrypted aperture ring at the back of the lens. The only thing that is plastic about this lens is the plastic lens hood that is also reversible. The size of this lens is about average for a 50mm f1.8 lens. It's very similar to the size of the Nikon Z50 1.8S lens. One great thing that I didn't really notice when reviewing the Sony version, but I noticed now, is the size of this lens is almost identical to the Viltrox 24 1.8 and the Viltrox 35 1.8 lens. Even the filter thread size is identical, 55mm. So not only it means you can share the filter between these lenses, but it's even better for filmmaker. But I will talk about that a little bit later on in this review. The only full-frame Viltrox f1.8 lens that is slightly different in size and weight is the 85 1.8 lens, which is a bit larger, heavier, and it takes a larger filter. If you have watched some of my TT Artisan APS-C lens review, you may remember that I mentioned I wish to see lens manufacturer try to create similar lenses with a more coherent design. So it may mean the lens has a similar size body, similar aesthetic design, same filter size, and there are many reasons for that. And these Viltrox AF lenses are definitely a great example of what exactly I want to see. I think this is a more polished, more mature way to design these lenses, so Viltrox definitely gets a big thumbs up from me. Overall, the build quality of this Viltrox lens is really good, especially consider the price of the lens. It's solid, it doesn't feel plastic at all, and if I want to find something to complain, maybe I can mention it is not a weather sealed lens. But to be honest, for a lens of this price, it is really not that fair to complain that it is not a weatherproof lens. However, if you ask me, I would be happy to pay, for example, $50 more for a weather sealed version of this lens, and I think a lot of my viewers would probably agree with me. On the lens mount, there is a USB-C port for firmware update, just like the Viltrox 24 and 35mm f1.8Z lens. You can also customize the focus ring to control other settings from the camera as well, just like a native Nikon Z lens. The Viltrox 50mm f1.8Z lens uses STM stepping autofocus motor. I tested this lens with both a Nikon Z6 and a Z9. The autofocus performance is pretty decent overall. The autofocus operation is really quiet. I won't say autofocus speed is super fast, but it is fast enough for most usage. Autofocus accuracy is also good, and face eye detection and tracking works very well as well. It is an internal focus lens, so the length of the lens doesn't change when you change the focus distance. So overall, I think the autofocus performance of this lens is really pretty decent. The minimum focus distance of this lens is 55 cm, and that would give you the maximum magnification of 0.1 time, which is really quite average for a 50mm lens. I really wish the lens can focus a little bit closer, as I found there were a few times that I couldn't get as close to my subject as I want when I was taking some close-up photos. Okay, now let's have a look at the image sharpness and start from the center sharpness first. At f1.8, the center sharpness is quite decent already. The only thing is that there appears to be a bit of chromatic aberration, as the black letters are not exactly black in this test photo. Stopping down the lens to f2.8 and the center becomes really sharp, and all the chromatic aberration disappear as well. Stopping down the lens any further, I don't really see any improvement in terms of center sharpness. Corner sharpness at f1.8 is acceptable, but the very extreme corner is a little bit soft. Stopping down the lens to f2.8 would improve the extreme corner a bit. You need to stop down the lens to somewhere between f4 and f5.6, then even the extreme corner sharpness become pretty decent. But remember, I'm talking about the really extreme corner of the photo, like the last 5% or so that is right next to the corner. If you look at the corner area just a little bit more towards the center, then even at f1.8, the sharpness is really pretty decent already. The Viltrox AF 50mm f1.8 set lens uses knife curve aperture brake to render nice round bokeh balls even when you stop down the lens a bit. The bokeh from this lens looks quite nice and soft, not really nervous at all. When I was reviewing the Sony version of this lens, I noticed the bokeh balls can have some pretty obvious onion pattern, which could be a bit distracting sometimes. This time with the Nikon Z version, I also see the onion pattern, but it appears to be not quite as strong or obvious. Not too sure if it's because of the sample variation or the Nikon version has a slightly different optics design, but this is something I noticed when I was comparing the photos that I shot with the Sony and the Nikon version of the Viltrox 50mm f1.8 lens. When shooting at the maximum aperture, this Viltrox lens has noticeable but very acceptable amount of vignetting. And once I stop down the lens to f2.8, then vignetting is almost not noticeable already. I think it's really not bad at all for a f1.8 lens. When it comes to chromatic aberration, this Viltrox lens performance is quite average. When shooting at f1.8, quite often I can see some color fringing around the high contrast area. It may not be really that noticeable if you just look at the photo at full screen size, but once you zoom in, you can see the chromatic aberration quite easily. Distortion control is pretty good with this 50mm Viltrox lens. In most of my real-world photos, I don't really notice any distortion. Even for a brick wall photo like this, I can only see a very minor amount of pincushion distortion. When I reviewed the Sony version of this Viltrox 50mm f1.8 lens, I found the lens flare performance was pretty good, only slightly not as good as the Sony 50 f1.8 lens. And this time, when I test this Nikon Z version again, I got the same results. There is only very small amount of lens flare and ghosting even when I'm directly shooting into the sun on a bright sunny day. Contrast also remains really good. So yeah, the lens flare performance of this Viltrox lens is quite a bit better than the average lenses from China. When stopping down the lens to around f8, you can start to see Sunstars in your photo. The 18-point Sunstars become quite sharp at the minimum aperture f16. The Sunstars from this Viltrox lens looks alright to me. I personally prefer more simple Sunstars, but then it is a personal preference. This Viltrox 50mm f1.8 lens has quite good Coma control. When shooting at the maximum aperture f1.8, if we look at the corner, the amount of Coma is at quite a low level. So not bad at all if you want to use this lens to do a bit of astrophotography without spending a lot of money. If you are a videographer, I think you would enjoy filming using this Viltrox 50mm lens. You have the decreased aperture ring. The autofocus performance is very good in video mode. When I tested with a Nikon Z9, even just with the standard settings, it tracks the subject very smoothly and the autofocus operation is also really quiet. There is some noticeable focus breathing in my focus breathing test, but I feel the amount is acceptable. And one more quite important thing is, since the size, weight and filter size of this Viltrox 50mm lens is almost identical to Viltrox 24mm f1.8 and 35mm f1.8 lens, so this is great for filmmaker who put their camera on a gimbal or a rig, so it would be really easy and really quick if you want to swap this lens with the 24 or 35mm Viltrox lens. It was almost exactly 1 year ago when I did my first review of the Viltrox autofocus lens for Nikon Z cameras. And now this is already my 4th review of the Viltrox full-frame autofocus Nikon Z lens. Are these Viltrox lenses better than the equivalent lenses from Nikon? No, they are not. The Nikon Z mount lenses are really good, especially when it comes to image quality. However, it doesn't mean these Viltrox lenses are bad at all. And quite opposite, I think these Viltrox lenses are also very decent lenses, just not as good as the Nikon lenses. But I would say, in terms of build quality, the Viltrox lenses with its full metal construction actually feels more solid than the Nikon lenses. And the Viltrox lenses also have an aperture ring that the Nikon lenses don't have. And the best thing is, the price of these Viltrox lenses are also a lot more affordable, and that makes them a fantastic budget choice. For example, for the price of a Nikon 85mm f1.8 S lens, I could buy 2 of these Viltrox f1.8 lenses instead, so it is a really good value for money choice. And this is the same thing about this latest Viltrox 50mm lens as well. The biggest weakness of this lens is probably the close focus distance that is really not that close, and the chromatic aberration is not as well controlled as some of the other latest lenses. But I think for most users, these are not really deal breaker, and other than that, it is a very well balanced budget lens.